Hey Ollie, how's it going?
Hey Joe, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. So today on the Data Nerd Herd, we have Ollie Hughes out of the UK. So for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. I'm Ollie. I'm one of the founders and CEO of Count.co. We're a new data platform built around notebooks, and we've been going for about we've been going for 5 years now. Would you believe it? But we launched only this year, so it's still pretty early days.
Interesting. We'll get to that in a second. I'm interested
Yeah,
in.
yeah. What else can I tell you? I'm based in the UK, as you said. So this is my background here. Unlike sort of Joe's cool setup with the decks, is actually my garden office, which I built during the lockdown in the UK last year. So this is my bolt hole from my crazy two kids and wife to make sure I get some work done.
That's awesome. I was about to ask you about that. Actually, it looks like a mountain cabin or something.
I
So
know it looks like I'm in some sort of like spa retreat in the Nordics, but actually I'm in just like 20 miles outside of London in my back garden. It's far less exotic, sadly.
that's awesome. Well, walk me through your progression then. I mean, it seems like you've done a bit. You founded a company. Launched some cool products, but walk me through sort of the your path before that. Like, how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so where should I start? So I went to uni at Cambridge, and that's where I met my co-founder, another Ollie. So there's two of us founders
Oh
of
no.
Count, two Ollies, one CTO and CEO, yeah. So we've known each other for a long time. We used to row together at Cambridge. He did physics, and I did mechanical engineering, and we both we know each other very well. We moved out of Cambridge into London as bachelors and got started our careers. Both sort of did management consultancy, and that obviously led quickly into like data analytics. But we both got itchy feet, and he moved into like plasma physics and did a PhD in plasma physics at Imperial, and I kept going, but I went into in-house and did sort of data architecture at Tesco. That was sort of a really like intensive piece of work looking at data and big data. I helped them build a cost to serve capability, like take all the data feeds across the business and help them bring that into sort of a cost allocation sort of engine, which let them see like net profitability by a product for the first time. That was a really cool project. Actually, really enjoyed that. And what was really fascinating, what was fascinating for me about that was just this huge gold mine for a retailer, as Tesco is, like just how to understand the true measure of performance of any product. And the bottleneck for accessing that was partly culture, but also just analytical skills and the ability to ask questions and have the right interface to interrogate that data for all the sort of commercial buyers in the organization. And it just led to the conversation with Ollie and me about like, where is the innovation in the space? At the time, we were both had used so many different sort of data visualization products, and they all had broadly the same kind of like design principles of like drag and drop dashboarding tools. And we just felt that there must be a better answer which would unlock get people close to the data and bring data closer into their workflow, basically. And so that's how we set up Count. Yeah, it's been 5 years. So the reason it's been so long is because we actually spent a long time looking at natural language querying. We wanted to see if we could get to the point where natural language querying, asking a question in English and in prose, where you could resolve the ambiguity of that down sufficiently to give people sort of, deep search-based analytics. And we got some way with that. We did a lot of patenting of it, but where we got to was just no matter how good we make it, how well we resolve ambiguity, we found that users always wanted to get back to like the logic of the query and understand exactly what had happened. People just really didn't respond well to ask a question, get a chart which sort of popped out of nowhere like magic. They'd be like, what is this chart? What's in the numbers? Where does it go? And we found ourselves butting up against sort of the same constraints that were already part of the way that the different dashboarding tools were used. So we never really felt it was going to unlock the big problems. And that's where we sort of pivoted quite hard and thought, actually, we've got to start again and look at this workflow of decision-making properly.
It's really interesting. I mean, walk me through that real quick. I mean, what sort of incumbent tools were you battling up against with this natural language querying?
Well, it wasn't really like, it wasn't a particular incumbent so much as just because we hadn't actually launched a product. This was 2 years of just R&D and like doing sort of very fundamental user testing with our interface. And yeah, obviously they were working out what they were using before, be it sort of spreadsheets or some sort of dashboarding tool. And we were trying to see if we could get people to unlock, do more with data who weren't already analytical. And the problem was that people who weren't analytical would ask a question. The more analytical you were, the more you would ask a question like pseudo SQL, but the quick answer you were getting, you'd still want to see it in like SQL or an Excel. You'd still want to see it in some sort of logically framed output. So you weren't really getting a huge productivity win there. You're just getting a nice gateway into the data. Whereas if you were sort of weren't very analytically competent, as it were, didn't have the analytical skills, the technology had to work really hard to resolve the ambiguity because you were asking questions a different way, and then you got a result, and then you still didn't know what to do with it because you didn't know how to interrogate or trust it. So it was quite an interesting failure on both sides. We didn't find it really worked, and I think in some respects the decision we made was the right one, because if you look at how the technology has evolved in natural language querying, it's been bolted into some of the incumbent tools. But it hasn't ever sort of evolved into like a proper deep search kind of analytical capability. Even like, I guess you've got things like ThoughtSpot led with the idea of NLP, but they call it search-based querying, not natural language. And the level of depth they can go to is, well, still not what you would need it to be the only interface for analyzing your data, I guess.
Yeah, because I thought about this too. I think kind of worked in some early Alexa type projects with this, where you'd ask Alexa a BI question and then you'd get an answer. But I think maybe, I'd like your take on this, but it seemed like you really had to fit in the parameters of the way you had to query the data. And so, and sort of the hints that you would have to give Alexa, for example, in the phrase matching, which it just seemed really funky. And I don't think you'd get any adoption from the sort of handcuffs on the way you'd have to ask the question very specifically and the way you'd have to get an answer.
Yeah, I'm sure we will get there. Like we just didn't have the resources to do it. And I think
back then,
and it's an interesting question. I think this also comes back to just like use case segmentation, because I think if you can I can see Alexa working exceptionally well when you're asking a certain set of questions where you're willing to accept an answer which without any depth, the context is so understood, like the sales number, for example, like what was sales yesterday? It's such a, if you prefer to ask Alexa rather than looking at a report and get a split second understanding, fair enough. But it's not really giving you any productivity saving in some respects. It's just a different way of you're just using a different sense, like you're hearing rather than sight. So it's more that we were struggling to work out how it would break through and actually give genuinely proper, either increase the analytical knowledge of a user or give them a huge, vast productivity gain. And that just wasn't there. Like as an alternative for niche use cases where potentially, like as you say, like the sales number in Alexa, the bounds are sufficiently narrow, you can probably optimize for it, but it's not on the fundamentals. I would argue it's not much better, faster, cheaper than just looking at a report.
Yeah, I would agree. We built some early versions of it. It felt more like it was just a cool party trick than it was useful. You know what I'm saying? And
it's an alternative.
It's an alternative, at best, And the same with kind of Slackbot. I was experimenting with asking similar questions in Slack and then getting analytics out of it. It seems like kind of kludgy, honestly. Like you're better off probably just using a notebook or just a regular report like a normal person. But that's what people are used to as well. I know in my experience, like the main incumbent is just it's Excel reports. Honestly, most people get their data from Excel. There's also 750 million Excel users in the world, so kind of hard to.
I love hearing stats about the frequency of feature use on Excel. There's some really fun stuff there. I don't want to quote a fact. I can't remember the exact numbers. I spoke to someone at Microsoft recently who was in the Excel team, and he was saying like there's don't quote me, but there's like a feature out there which only like 3 people in the world have ever used. Like it's kind of the breadth and depth of this feature set is so great that despite its user base, it's so the tail of usage is so narrow. It gets so tight towards the end.
That's interesting.
I don't know what it is, but fun. It's been around for a long time. You just get feature writers, right? You just get saturation on features.
That's interesting. So what are some of the insights then? I mean, you did the natural language querying, and that might not have panned out how you wanted. I mean, what kind of led you into this notebook approach then?
Yeah. So yeah, it was a pretty hard time actually. We just stopped. The team was 12 at that point, and we went down to 5, like a 5 core product team. And actually, we're still 5 now. We had to start hiring again now after like 2 years of running, 2.5 years of running as a team of 5. And we basically felt like we needed to understand we wanted to understand how the decisions made with data, basically. So we did a boring piece of work, which is sort of back to my consultancy days of just like going to organizations and who very kindly let us just watch how the decisions were made, like interview them, understand the flow at a very high level of detail of like how do you go from a database to an insight in a chart or in a meeting to make a decision. So not just like get to the chart, but the actual discussion happens around that information to get to a decision being made. And we did it in big companies and startups and different situations hundreds of times. And we just wanted to understand that workflow because we felt like that's the core value. It was really interesting. We still look at it nowadays. We still collect this kind of information. And what we found, what we think is perhaps unsurprising in some respects, was that the first thing was that decisions are always made with new analysis. Like that's what really, one of the things that really shocked us was just that existing dashboards, existing reports or Excel workbooks, wherever they are, like if you're doing a very, very rarely are they sufficient to answer a decision without additional analysis being created. Like you always, particularly the more important the decision, the more you go and do analysis, new analysis to find out the answer. So in some respects, that led us to go like, a lot of these reporting tools are just not fit for purpose. They're designed for reporting, not decision making. And actually, they're never, all these dashboards are just being created one-offs and never used again. At best, these kind of dashboards or these kind of reports give you status quo performance. They don't give you incremental performance. They give you they let you maintain a certain level of performance. The second thing which surprised us was just, that all these workflows involve SQL. In fact, most of them involve SQL, or I would say simpler. So it often started with SQL, and then you'd move it into a sort of easier environment from there. So SQL to like a BI tool, drag and drop, or into Excel to create some charts. But it always involves SQL somewhere. Very rarely were you doing something SQL to something more complicated. Like decision making is still surprisingly and perhaps understandably very descriptive in how it works. Very few decisions in a human-based decision-making context is done on predictive. Some is, but it's not anywhere close to the amount you'd expect given the hype in the industry around machine learning.
Right.
And then thirdly, it was the biggest surprise for us was just quite how messy the workflow is, from data set to decision. Was just a horrific process. Multiple tools be involved, cutting and slicing data between tools, like hard breaks in workflow, analysts serving other people, getting a consensus, answering follow-up questions, iterating numbers, checking they're right, charting, exporting charts statically into Word documents. The whole thing was a complete bundle. I think the average, I think we haven't got a statistically accurate, we didn't get to like thousands and thousands. We got a few hundred examples, but the average number of tools being used was like 3.4. It was crazy numbers of tools to get to a decision point. And that was sort of those three things of like, it's all SQL or easier. It is a fragmented workflow which doesn't make it iterative and breaks up the auditability of this process. And the fact that you need to do new analysis to make better decisions. We need a different kind of tool was the thinking. And that led us to thinking about notebooks, particularly because at the same time we were looking at data science and platforms like Kaggle and thinking, they were doing some great collaboration. People were collaborating on Kaggle for data science, but they were obviously doing it from machine learning context. And we were like, the notebook idea helps with a lot of these problems. Let's see if we can make a notebook not designed for technical audiences, for technical use, for machine learning, build it for BI, build it for the workflow in which decisions are made in an organization. That was the journey to where we got to.
Interesting. Did
Very
you
long-winded, sorry.
well, did you find ways that, I guess, led to better decisions than others? Because you had a decent sample size, I would imagine, where you could at least maybe get some patterns in terms of.
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of interesting. I think part of obviously the bigger the decision, the harder it is, because as you'd expect.
Right.
The kind of interesting thing for us was comparing what does it take to get, like, what was interesting for us was when we were thinking about like the notebook approach, was thinking about how our current data tools set up and what is the requirements for a decision-making process. So that was what really interested us, because we're using, obviously, the incumbent tools are often BI tools or tools which are like designed for reporting primarily, and they have a different requirement list to succeed than you do if you need to make a decision-making tool, because decisions are just fundamentally different things. If you're reporting, you're looking at numbers regularly, and the charts and the reports you're serving should potentially change very infrequently. You shouldn't be changing your definition of sales or your KPI dashboard very regularly. Whereas in comparison, in decision making, you're looking at things very intensely for a period of time to make a decision, and then probably not looking at it again for months. It's a one-off thing. So you have frequently building new assets all the time in a decision making tool. You need to for a decision making process, not for a reporting process. The other thing which was interesting was just the audience. So in a reporting context, everyone needs to see the numbers individually, just check the numbers are okay, and there's a lot of shared context for what matters. In a decision-making context, you've got to reach consensus with people all agreeing an outcome collectively, collaboratively. Whereas in reporting, you can all do it asynchronously. You could all look at the sales numbers individually, make a decision, or check what's going on and leave it. But the opposite is true in decision-making. So it was just, that was what really fascinated us, was just like fundamentally our belief is like, we've got this huge investment, huge sector built around data tools and BI tools, and they're geared up towards reporting, which obviously is important, but it's actually not now where the biggest value add is. The biggest value add is in decision making. How do you make better decisions with the numbers and data you have to make improvements to your business? But these tools, which are designed for reporting, are not geared up to serve them very well. And that was the big big lightning bolt for us about it, was just thinking through the requirements for that decision-making process as being almost the opposite of what you need from a reporting process.
Help me try and square this circle then, because you have, on one hand, I think the desire to be data-driven, and this is being driven a lot by people selling reporting tools, data science tools, whatever those are, and so forth. But if I'm reading between the lines, it seems like we might entirely be asking the wrong questions or approaching the problem in the wrong way. We could be approaching it in a different way.
I think it's the next evolution, rather than being like we're doing the wrong thing. I think it's more like we've done stage one. Like most organizations now have relatively robust reporting processes, which gives you a number when someone wants a number, which is like a key number, which they look at regularly, which drives performance of the business. Then they can look at it. Those numbers shouldn't change regularly, have well understood. They give you status quo performance. That's done. And actually, increasingly, that's becoming a commodity that you can get a dashboard. Mm-hmm. That's fine. Where I think the market is slow is to go like, let's move on to the next evolution of this, which is actually now we've got a baseline understanding of our performance. How do we get better? How do we move faster forwards? And realizing the capability to do the decision making needs a different kind of set of tooling, a different kind of setup, a different kind of workflow enablement, which is collaborative, which allows numbers to be positioned in context, which allows people to do iterative, fast exploration of data and present it quickly. And that is where BI tools fail. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's more like what we see, how we position Count is like, we're not trying to replace your BI tool, we're trying to be a capability you buy in alongside it, because the BI tool is not serving your needs anymore. It's doing the basics, but is it actually enable you to grow and improve?
I mean, Seeing more and more talk about decision science, that does something like Count kind of fall into the realm of decision science?
We it's interesting. I find decision science is difficult market definition because there's it packages a lot of different types of solution under one hood. So I would say with the purest definition of decision science, i.e. helping you make better decisions using mathematical and statistical step processes to enable it, definitely. If we're not doing an AI box though, that's where I find we find a lot of decision science like, give us your data feed and magically answers will appear out of nowhere. We're not in that game at all.
Right.
That is a game which we haven't got interest to go into really. I think there's so much basics that haven't been done.
Yeah.
Even in the descriptive analytical world, but to make this process better, more collaboration, faster exploration in a workflow which works for the analysts and the people who can explore data themselves, and then letting them present it well. We're just tackling those basic things. It sounds really boring, but it's when the combination of those three things is hugely valuable.
It seems to be, and like you pointed out too, I mean, the key to coming up with a decision is also driving consensus, right? I mean, you could certainly make a unilateral decision and end up pissing off your team as a result, or you could get buy-in. So, because I think there's a lot more to unpack with decisions where it's definitely a numbers game. I think it also seems to be a diplomacy game at the same time. I mean, definitely try and, run a department or a company being the person who just makes all the decisions unilaterally without getting any buy-in from people. We'll see how long you last. So
yeah, exactly. It is fascinating, isn't it? There's a lot. You're absolutely right. There's a lot more. Like the culture of the organization is probably one of the most important parts of a decision making, a good decision making ethos, because you are not scared of asking questions you won't know the answer to, or the answer could be scary, or doesn't just back up your own opinion. Yeah, so those are issues which we don't address directly in upfront necessarily. Like we're not trying to create an artificial framework for decision making, like with gateways and stuff like that. That kind of flow is. We just think that the core idea for us is to get the numbers as close to your workflow as possible, and then by doing that, make that barrier so low that numbers appear more organically, easier in an easier way. The threshold for insight is less, and the power of contextualized numbers and giving high quality answers back is greater, is easier, but also greater.
Interesting. I know when we first met, we were talking about the concept of a DAG as well. And so how that fits into stuff. I mean, can you walk me through that? I think that I've been brooding on that for a bit. I thought that was actually a really interesting concept with respect to decisions.
I love your. I think as a guy, your gut background, I'm sure DAGs are very much your cup of tea. I mean, so it's the DAG. Yeah, so the idea of as I said, we've adopted a notebook approach to the platform, which means that you are working long form, and that means that you are the value of that is twofold. One, it allows as an analyst doing a workflow to build upon themselves. So it's something which, if you're a technical user in sort of data science notebooks like Jupyter, you're used to, but it's not a thing which has been adopted in sort of the BI world or in the SQL world. We still write SQL in scripts. Whereas we're actually, we've moved in Python, people moved away from scripts years ago into a sort of a notebook approach to segmenting and building upon themselves and having a much better sort of flow. And so we've done that work in Count to give SQL analysts the ability to build upon themselves and have a workflow which enables iterative exploratory analysis down the page, referencing previous queries as if they are tables using a DAG. So allowing you to sort of create a chain, a graph of your queries and results, which you can build upon and change. And that gives you a great flow. So it's a technical solution to a problem we were trying to solve, which is how do we make querying faster and more effortless for quick exploration for decision making. The thing which is unique about that as well is that for us, we've built this to be interactive. So the DAG also allows you to create a sort of inflow data model, which means that when you publish a notebook, you can reveal parameters for end users to play around with, which inject value variables into your SQL, which then cascade through your DAG and produce outputs and visuals. And it means that you can not only explore quickly, but then package those queries up to provide a much more powerful data app for users just using SQL. And that's sort of the DAG is sort of an enabling technology for two ends of the decision-making process. So yeah, it was a solution. It's a neat solution for a few different areas of the problem we were trying to solve.
It's really novel. I suppose you might be able to coin a new term. I don't know if it exists already, but like decision lineage, sort of how DAGs have given you like data lineage and so forth.
Well, you see, you're on it. Yeah. So the other beauty of a DAG is lineage completely. It gives you the ability to, and that it gives you freedom to see and query exactly how the decision's being made. Basically, from the database through to decision point or outcome, you can see the whole every step on the way in a way which, if you have a broken, fragmented decision-making process of X query to Excel to chart to email, you just haven't got that flow. You don't know what's happened in 3 or 4 different places. Whereas here you've got lineage, you've got reproducibility, but also but you've also got an audit trail which you can follow back to the database and all the way through to the decision point as well in terms of the way it's been discussed and signed off. And it's really powerful because we one of the beauties of that is it enables, we believe, and we're seeing in our early customers, it enables more freedom. Because if you have lineage, then decisions that you can give people more flexibility, more freedom to play and explore data, because any decision they make, as long as it's in the tool, you can check it all the way through. And that's quite powerful for things like enabling a culture of or increasing capability of analytics. You're not trying to, we see so many people trying to lock data down and trying to make sure, understandably for some reasons, but locking data down because they're worried the queries that are going to happen are going to be wrong, and therefore decisions are made without their consent. But that's only because the people make decisions without making it easy to see the flow of and the way the query runs, and what the lineage is, which I think the DAG solves really neatly.
It's really good insight. I suppose there might be other adaptations of this too, kind of like decision version control and stuff. So I don't know quite. I mean, you could maybe apply a new template to a new set of decisions and see if there's a better outcome or something. I don't know, just brainstorming here. But this is definitely a different take than I've seen before in terms of using data to solve problems. I think it's sort of like a good friend of mine always talks about approaches in machine learning as like playing the first 4 bars of a song and never getting past that though, right? And so I feel the same. It's kind of the same in BI land where everyone's like, well, we enable faster queries and faster reports. But I think, as I listen to you, it seems like maybe that's good for a set of problems, and it solves a certain type of problem where you just want to, like you say, get status quo. And but yeah, I mean, as you pointed out, though, and this makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought of that before. Where new analysis drives decisions. That's something I hadn't thought of before, but it actually makes a ton of sense. So
yeah, I mean, I would love to say it was a sort of a eureka moment in the bath, but it was just hard. I was only from failure did we get to this idea and do lots of painful observation, just thinking through. It wasn't obvious to us, even though we've been like leading analytical teams for years and doing lots of analytical products. It was only when we stepped back and looked at the pattern did we think, hang on, what are the requirements for making a decision? They're fundamentally different to the way these tools are structured. And it's not that reporting isn't important, clearly it is, but it's not the place where innovation should be happening now. We need to move away and think about flow of decision making and making decision making faster, easier, cheaper, ultimately, I guess. It's one of those things of another way of putting this, another way of describing this kind of idea is the idea of thinking about the spread of decision making. So you've got like operational decision making, which is again highly narrow in its bounds. Often it's like looking at someone's in a factory looking at the HUD, what's the rate at which we're producing widgets? That needs a number which you can then change the dial on. It's operational, it's very bound in its context. You looked at it regularly, always the same numbers. that requires that's obviously that's great for dashboards. Like dashboards are ideal for that purpose. But as you go up and make sort of more like steering based decisions, weekly or monthly steering based decisions, or you do strategic decision making, they are just fundamentally different kind of things. And they're increasing context, increasing consensus, increasing amounts of thought and iteration. And then the dashboard tool no longer is the right one. And that's where the value, that's where the huge value can be seen. Once you've got operational reporting done, the area and the playing area is huge to do other things. And that's what we see. We just ask our clients we work with, I just go like, great, you've got a reporting layer. Like, what's your decision-making process? And they go, we haven't got one. It's a complete cobbled together process. And we go, well, that's fine, but actually what's the missing value here? Like, how much could you do faster? How much more could you achieve if you actually had a bit more of a robust process, which isn't just the tool, but it's a tool plus process and auditability and transparency, etc. But there needs to be something there to support that. And that's what Count's trying to do.
Awesome. Kind of switching gears a bit. I mean, you're taking a very innovative approach in the field of data right now. I mean, where do you see data going over the next, say, 3 years?
Yeah, it's really busy space. It's if I'm honest, I find it. I think it's the amount of, there's a lot of people solving lots of very niche problems in the data space. And I think there's a fragmentation of tooling, which is just incredible. Like I constantly see, a new sort of a new startup launching every single day, solving different sort of niche issues about like either like a niche vertical or niche layer, or they're solving a pain point which exists in the sort of modern data stack. And all those problems are real. And I'm not saying they're not real, but they all feel like you couldn't solve all the problems with, like, you'd have too many tools to manage to solve all the problems that are available to you. So I feel like there's a degree of, I expect to see quite a lot of aggregation going on soon. Like, I think you can already see that in the big data platforms currently. You can see that with Snowflake, BigQuery, Azure, they're starting to like aggregate their sort of tooling and offering like a sort of playground of tools off their ecosystem. I think that's not necessarily a good thing. I think Tristan at DBT has mentioned this as well in his recent announcement of their run fundraise, like actually keeping data independence across from a platform, not getting locked down to particular platform, and getting that kind of, we are a particular type of data platform only, I think is a thing which I think is worth fighting for. But the trend is very much to be attached to one product currently.
Yeah, it always
basically, I see the bundling happening again. The bundling of the stack, happening. It's going to happen. Yeah.
It always gives me pause when I see, I mean, Tristan's a good dude, but it also gives me pause when I see anybody saying, well, avoid lock-in, except maybe with our stuff. And then, but it is what it is. Yeah, I agree. I think the fragmentation it's insane right now. And yeah, it's sort of like going to the bazaar on a weekend or something. I don't know if you like in Southeast Asia where I traveled before COVID. Yeah, I go to these. There's this weekend open market in Bangkok, and it's got like 3,000 or maybe more vendors all in one place. And that's what kind of except the data tooling space is like that times like a lot more, actually, it seems like. So because I know in marketing tech alone, there's like over 8,000-9,000 companies in MarTech, not even including fintech, not even including data tooling proper, but all these things have APIs, right? And so you can make an argument, a lot of these are data products. Either you'll use them or you'll either as a tool or a data source. And then it just, the combinations is massive right now. And so it definitely seems like consolidation is going to happen.
I think consolidation is going to happen. I think, which is, I think in the appropriate places, basically, I think, it's also great. There's also lots of innovation there. I think it's the barrier to entry for doing a data product is really low, because anyone can code in Python can probably build a data product of some sort and do some sort of data exploration tool or something like that. And I think what I think gives us confidence is that we spent a long time. We've taken a long time to launch. We've worked very hard at what the core problem we're trying to solve is, and we have a lot of our own proprietary technology built to make it something which we have our path. We have more, like, our technology journey is, we've mapped out more. We have more than I think others. We've had a luxury of a thinking time to make sure it's the right problem to solve. But yeah, it's still difficult to sort of cut through when the noise is so great. I think that's no doubt. There's no doubt about that.
The noise is
You've got to
great.
really know what you're doing.
And there's a lot of funding too. You know, I mean, it seems like any VC is just going to throw money at you if you have a data product these days. And I'm not joking, because I talk to VCs and they say, well, if you have a data product, they'll probably throw money at you. That's kind of how it is. So, so I mean, there's a lot of noise and a lot of money, and so that definitely creates, you know, a pretty frothy environment where, like you say, it's the barrier to entry is very low to make a data product. But what I find interesting is what I see is there's quite a few kind of copycat kind of stuff. You know, I mean, I know everyone wants to try to have their own take and stuff, but it seems like there's not a lot of, I would say, second or third order thinking behind the types of products or approaches being taken. Like, I think you've, by the virtue of, you just spent a lot of time thinking about this, you've dug underneath the surface and then some for a long time, and that only comes through just banging your head against the wall. You know, numerous.
Yeah,
right, because it gets you to, I think, the ideas you wouldn't get if you were just taking I'd say very just kind of superficial copycat approach. Like, I'm going to make a data ingestion tool, right? Or I'm going to make a transformation tool that's like DBT but better.
Yeah.
You know? So,
but there are also like huge problems that haven't been solved well. Like, I think I don't want to like pretend like, I think I don't think it's true is like there aren't like genuine innovations to come. Like, it's like it's a solved problem. Like, the decision making is our particular sort of goal to solve that. Like, I think that's where we think there's a massive gap there. I think that's hopefully pretty obvious for people watching us to see that they agree that there's actually a missing gap there, and it's kind of like a dawn moment, like it was for you. Like, actually, hang on, we just got the wrong kind of tools here? But there's loads of other problems. Like, I think self-service hasn't been solved. Like, the idea of like anyone really tackling the, like, obviously, like, there's lots of like, you know, SQL builders out there, like GUI builders for SQL, which I don't think have ever really worked very well. Like, how do you help a person feel confident with analytical concepts in software? Like, that'd be a huge thing. We try with natural language querying, not the right answer for different reasons, but that's still a huge problem that's worth tackling and would completely change everything. I think the interesting challenge going on right now is like analytical languages. So we've completely backed SQL. We think SQL is the right analytical language for BI, for analytics. And it gives that lineage thing, as I mentioned before. Like, I think the power of SQL is valuable in that way, because it's such a sort of functional focused language and declarative, but it gives you so much power. But obviously, like, there's Python, there's R, there's all these other languages going on at the moment. Part of our focus and what we're enjoying as a sort of technical challenge for us is, how do we make SQL a better analytical language? Because it's not been loved much. It's still considered to be like the sort of the worst class citizen of analytical languages. People are like switching to other languages if they can, but I think it's just because SQL hasn't been given the innovations that other languages have, like moving it to a notebook, for example. So we think SQL is the right technology to back. Like, everyone's tried to kill it many times and it hasn't worked. It allows simplification, abstraction in a really great way, which is great for other and non-technical users. It gives you lineage. It obviously runs off the database. That's the biggest sort of win, is that it keeps your computation in the same place, which I think is very powerful, again, for lineage and for power. Which needs a bit of love. But there's an interesting tussle still going on there about like which analytical language is going to win. It's been quite interesting to see Snowflake launch some like Java and Python capabilities built into it recently, which I think is going to be quite an interesting idea of like, actually, let's make our data warehouse sort of language agnostic somewhat, and we just make sure that the computation can happen in one place, rather than like, you know, you do a data science model, you sort of do a query to SQL, bring it into your virtual machine, and then you're running on small data in basically a crappy laptop in someone's server, trying to run Python in some sort of Jupyter notebook, and it's not the right answer. It's not the right answer.
Yeah, I could see that. It's I teach a class on SQL at the university here in Salt Lake. I find it interesting because it's Yeah, it's a language I don't think is going anywhere, but there's a lot of ceremony to writing SQL. Like the fact you have to do a select statement every single time or whatever is, for analytical purposes, you're going to be writing select statements, but it just every single query has to be the same ish. It's just frustrating.
It's very verbose. Yeah, it's hugely verbose.
Yeah.
That's.
But the syntax is just a bear to teach too. Like I've taught a lot of people SQL at this point. And I think it's there definitely could be some improvements. Maybe somebody will come up with a way to kind of meld that with like a Python language or something. I don't know. So hint, hint, hint.
Watch this space.
So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's
something we're thinking about. Yeah. There's just a lot of things which have happened in other analytical languages which haven't happened in SQL yet. I think there's a lot of space there in that problem as well. I mean, things like, the incompressibility of SQL is a problem, but like there's so much we don't do, like isn't commonplace to do with UDFs. Like, and UDFs are hugely powerful, like defining functions you can place into your database, which then you can call again. It's just not commonplace to see that. People don't consider that part of their setup, and I think that's a big mistake. That would solve that problem really quickly. So enabling that would be a huge win. It's not quite the same as sort of the volume of libraries you can get in Python, for example. But it's a step towards that in quite a big way.
I think projects like BigQuery are doing a pretty good job at bringing in like machine learning into BigQuery and all that kind of stuff. But again, it uses SQL, and so. But most data scientists, I think it's improving a lot. I remember there was definitely a time where there was almost a snobbery in terms of data scientists wanting to know SQL. It was like, well, that's for analysts, because analyst is also a 4-letter word, back around like the mid 2010s. That's serious. Like I remember in the early 2010s, late 2000s, the NoSQL movement was building up. Data science was becoming a hot thing. I think the term data science was coined in the modern version 2009, I think. And it was just kind of off the races, right? Like all the old stuff is garbage. SQL, garbage. Data warehouses, garbage. Analysts, they're lower class citizens, right? Like data scientists it's where it's at. And when Python took off, I know there's a lot of snobbery with respect to SQL. It's like pandas is everything. Why do we need SQL?
Well,
that's what they're all learning now.
16 gigs, yeah.
Right. So yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's kind of back to the future moment, because now SQL is, I think it's sort of like I don't know if you're familiar with the Lindy effect. It's basically the phenomenon where something that's been around for a long time is probably going to be around forever. So SQL fits into that bucket. Unix shell scripting fits into that bucket. And so, no matter how many times people have tried to kill SQL, and it's been plenty at this point, it's just the zombie that keeps on going, and you ain't gonna kill it. So that and Excel, honestly, spreadsheets are the other one.
True. And I think that's, so my prediction would be that you'll see I think there'll be a push from the data warehouse providers to unified compute. I think that's what will happen. So, and I think that will mean, I think, bringing language capabilities of other than SQL into the data warehouse structure. That's what I predict. That's sort of that's what we built our structure, our infrastructure to support. So we're backing SQL currently, but we really what we're trying to back is the best interface to data warehouse. That's the kind of the goal, to enable decision making to flow from there. So we'll ride that wave with them.
Yeah, no, it's a path of least resistance. And the thing with technology is you can't be too far out, right? Otherwise you're as good as wrong. I mean, you have to kind of adopt what people are using right now and make that platform better, it seems. So that's interesting. I guess kind of switching gears again, like any advice for people who are running companies or founding companies?
I don't think we've got lots of hunches yet to be proven. So I think I wouldn't consider myself to be a founder of wisdom quite yet. What I can say is, like, what I've learned from mistakes is, as I mentioned before, like, we've made massive progress very quickly by understanding the problem we're trying to solve. That problem is still massive. It's not like it's a small problem, but just knowing the problem in a way which then allows you to pick the solution elegantly was the innovation. So we jumped too quickly to natural language being the the pinnacle of what you could possibly imagine. Let's tackle that big problem, and assuming that solution was the right one. And despite said despite it us pushing that technology forward, it was never going to be the right solution, we felt. So that was our big mistake, I think. So yeah, the work we did to just stop there and properly analyze the problem well was it's startup 101, isn't it? But we didn't do it. So yeah, do that well. And the other one is just, I've also I think we are quite uncommon. We've been in kind of a scrappy startup kind of working out what we're doing state for. We're now out of that, I guess, but we were that for a number of years, and we pulled all the late nighters, all nighters we possibly could, work crazy hours. And I really am a full believer, and have empirically proven that actually to myself that if I work sensible hours and rest properly, I am more productive. That is a thing which is so hard to it's so hard to believe when you're in the moment doing something really important and you want to get it done, and you want to stay up till midnight or 3 a.m. to try and do it. But on the long run, discipline wins, I think. And that was something which I've learned painfully.
That's awesome. Yeah, I do agree with the discipline part, especially. Like for me, it's just about getting into the habits every day. Like having a schedule too, I think helps. So like, save the morning for when you have to make important decisions. Because by the time you get to the afternoon, you're going to be kind of fried, and I don't think you're going to be making as you'll be making decisions under duress more than you would because you're in the right mental state. Plus, I think I think it helps in some ways. I mean, you have kids, I have kids, and it's I think in some ways it forces you to be really efficient with your time in that regard, because otherwise you could be just pulling the all-nighters every night, and so some people can do it.
Well, some people can do it. And some people are abnormal, but I think majority of us, I don't consider myself to be abnormal at all. We have to, I'm not saying you shouldn't pull all nighter. If there's an actual tangible deadline the next day, which you do it, fair enough. But like that won't work as a norm. It has to be the average has to be sensible. I think I've realized for myself.
Yeah. Well, if you find yourself doing all-nighters a lot, I think it's more speaks to poor preparation, because if you find yourself having to be in crisis mode all the time, like that shows you messed up like several steps, back, kind of like in chess, where it's like you got killed because you didn't make a mistake this time. You made a mistake like down the road that set you up for it. This is getting into constant crisis mode. You feel like you're a hero, but it's like the dumbest form of heroism, because you're only screwing yourself in the end, actually. So
that's so true. That's so true. The other thing the other thing I've noticed is the email. I've really worked hard over lockdown, like when you've got like lots of time to look at your phone and screens, like how much I've killed all my social media on my phone, basically. I just don't do it. I don't do it. But I've also realized email is just as much of an addictive loop as social media. And I've worked really hard to keep my email closed, other than like 15-minute blocks, like scheduled in. Otherwise, it just becomes the kind of busy work mentality of just like, I'll answer that quick thing and get a endorphin hit of solving a problem or answering an email. That's been a huge barrier for my productivity. There's so much to go out, basically. For me, there's been so much to go out in productivity purposes. I'm not anywhere close to being sufficiently productive enough to warrant pulling late nighters. I can just work harder on my own focus.
Right.
Deep Work by Cal Newport has been a really great book. I recommend that to anyone.
It's a great book.
Look at this. I've read it twice, and I don't read books very often twice. It's been really hard to go back to.
It's a fantastic book. And the email thing is true too. Like I'll look at my emails, but I won't respond to them unless it's an emergency, and then I'll fire off. But I save like basically 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. for emails, and that's it.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I'm an 8 till 9 kind of guy, but I mean, fair enough.
Yeah, same thing, basically. Yeah, another good book was David Allen's Getting Things Done. I think his is you would almost have to be like obsessive compulsive to follow his thing to the T, but like just writing out everything that's on your mind, and getting it out on paper. And then I think allocating that to wherever it needs to get done. Like that's another thing where it just, because his whole thing is stress, and is one of those things where everything in your mind, every task that's like lingering has no context actually, and it has no sense of time or place. It's just competing, like a pinball in your head with everything else. And if you can get that out and just put it somewhere, then it frees you up quite a bit. But it's
Yeah,
interesting.
I think that's in a similar kind of, I completely identify with that actually. One of the things I find difficult being a founder is depth and breadth. Like that's basically the problem I'm trying to solve my work for, like putting emails to one portion of the day is like, to get into flow for me takes most people quite a lot of time to get into flow, and just you have to basically, I allocate time for breadth and depth. Otherwise you can't switch between them. And it's one of the things which often you get particularly as CEO, you get torn across, the time gets fragmented and torn across lots of different areas. And allocating time, blocking out time is so important. I found this is all for me, but it's a work in progress, certainly.
Yeah, no, it's we have stressful jobs, so and I think it's also, like figuring out better ways to communicate and lead teams. I think that's the other thing I spend a lot of time thinking about is, how do I level up as a leader, and as a person, really? Because I think, I mean, you probably worked for good bosses, you probably had miserable bosses, and it's about like figuring out, okay, so like what did I like about this experience? What would I never want to inflict on anyone ever again? And so that's
You learn most from I found I've learned most from my bad bosses than my good ones, I think. Like by country mile, the kind of unfortunate situation of like, yeah, you learn most through pain and pain avoidance. But yeah, no, there's definitely been some highlights into sort of like mentors who I still refer to, and often actually a few of them are angel investors in Count, which has been really nice to have them on the journey with me, because they often just they have a unique knack of tapping into the thing which they sort of work out what's probably on my. They work quickly to get to the root of the problem in my head very quickly. That's sort of an annoying trick I'd love to learn. Is sort of speak to someone and really get quickly to the point that where we need to discuss. That's a real skill.
That's awesome. It does help to have people like that too. I was talking to somebody yesterday about that actually, and he runs a similar company to mine, but he brought up some pretty key points. And I was like, oh yeah, that's actually really, really true. And I hadn't thought about it. Just figuring out blind spots that, well, for you, they're blind spots by definition because you didn't think about them. So,
do you have so one of the things I've really valued in the last 2 years is having like a confidential founder group, people who are all going through roughly like founders of a company, different stages and different outcomes, but just have that kind of ability to sort of bring anything to the table confidentially has been really helpful, just to unpick often very big knots in my brain, which actually other people are just very easy to sort of help me untie. That's been really helpful.
It's so
do you have
helpful.
a kind of similar thing?
Yeah, I do. And it's founders, I would say, across different industries too. I mean, data is one. That's always tricky because you want to make sure you're not like working directly with your competitor and stuff. But even then, I've realized too, like sharing knowledge is one of those things where even if I told you exactly how we're going to run our company, you can't go and replicate that. How would you, so because like Count was born basically from like your experiences and your team's experiences and the mistakes you made along the way and everything else, right? And I told my friend who runs a very similar company, it's like, I couldn't be your company. I couldn't replicate what you're doing, no matter if I tried. And I don't know, like I could. So that means also like you can't do what I do, right? And so it's just everything that we do that's special is what we do. And I mean, you can maybe be able to superficially compete, but you don't have the DNA that we do, right? Like you don't work like we do. We don't work like you do. And so to me, it kind of doesn't matter. So I mean, so yeah, I just found like having open conversations with other founders and people who are in your shoes, it's invaluable. Otherwise, you're prone to making the same mistakes they did, or whatever. But you might also find you're doing something really innovative that nobody's ever thought of before. Like the conversation I had yesterday was, well, why is it that we're doing stuff in the consulting space that nobody's really doing? Is it because they've tried it and found it was a waste of time, or are we actually that fresh and innovative? It's hard to know. It's counterfactual, but it's something you got to ask yourself too. Like, is the way we're doing stuff, is it actually because it's worthwhile, or is it because we're actually really dumb and haven't yet hit the roadblock that's about to hit us in about a kilometer? So,
yeah, you can. Founding a company often is obviously about resolving ambiguity quickly, isn't it? So I think those are the kind of questions, like they are annoying questions, and they're kind of, I often find myself it takes a huge amount of energy to sort of ask those hard questions of yourself and be willing to listen to a different answer. And I think sometimes, and having someone who's going to do it, tell you that, ask those questions for you and risk your relationship with them because it's not enough question you want to hear, is invaluable. I think that's true.
I would say definitely for anybody who's thinking about having a group of, kind of this confidential group of founders and other people, may not be founders, but just a group of friends really and confidants, like definitely have thick skin. You'll probably be called out and you might not like what you hear. You probably hate it actually, but you got to deal with it. And so it's part of the game. And I would say like businesses in general is tough, right? Like you just gotta have a thick skin. Like if you go into this with thin skin and you get offended easily, or you take failure, you don't like to fail. This ain't the game for you. So
not the game.
Not the game at all.
You can develop thick skin as well, but I've certainly developed it increasing as I've gone on the journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The stuff that I think freaked you out at the beginning is probably not the stuff that freaks you out now. Like it's just who cares?
Agreed.
So, well, cool, man. Well, awesome. It's about coming up in an hour, so probably a good time to close out. But it's been a fun chat, man. Really appreciate your time and.
Yeah, likewise, Joe. It's been great. It's nice to just, as it's in, I'm not sure it's an Americanism or not, but chew the cud. Is that one thing you
definitely not?
You say that? No. It means it's like just work things through and chew over different conversation topics and have a chat.
I think they call it like chew the fat here is maybe what they call it. But yeah,
I'm gonna have like those people email me from England saying you don't say that in England either. It's just you. So I'm gonna check myself. Or what I think is actually commonplace phrases.
Yeah, my only knowledge of whatever they say in England is like off of like the English office, the UK office. So, which I guess for management too, if you want to know how not to be managers, do everything David Brent does, just avoid that, and you'll probably do just fine. So,
I'm actually seeing Ricky Gervais live next week. So
no way!
Yeah,
wow,
it's gonna be really fun.
That's awesome.
It's gonna be rude, but it's gonna be fun.
Well, he's awesome for a reason. So
yeah, there you go.
Cool, man. Well, have a good time at that. And for people who want to learn more about you and Count, how would they do that?
Oh, you just head to our website, count.co, count.co.
Cool.
And
awesome.
You can chat to us through there.
Awesome. Well, Ollie, it's been a pleasure. So until next time.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah. Have a good night. See you, man. Bye.
Same to you.